You are listening to the Billy Dees podcast. We are waiting just a minute for everyone to engage the live stream. Remember, you can find the Billy Dees podcast on your favorite platform.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. If you're new here, we just wait a moment until everyone has a chance to lock on to the live stream. Sometimes they have to refresh whatever it is that they're using. I'll do the formal introduction in just a moment. Cynthia is with me. Cynthia, how are you doing?
I'm amazing. Thanks for asking, Billy.
You're amazing. Yes, you are. You still got your new microphone fired up. All right. Well, that's fantastic. All right. Well, we're about a little over a minute in with the intro included, so we'll go ahead and start. Here again, if you're new to the live stream, we record the podcast that goes on the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all those separately. That's running in the background. And we kind of invite the audience to come in and check out the recording while we're producing the podcast. That's what the live stream is. And we're going to start that right now. Here we go. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. You can find the Billy Dees podcast anywhere podcasts are found. We are on all the platforms. On Thursday nights, we go live. We are live on X. We are live on Facebook and also a Rumble, a few others I won't mention because I don't want to get in any trouble. But my co-host for Thursday nights is Cynthia Elliott. Cynthia, how are you?
Hello, Billy. I'm doing amazing. Thanks for asking.
She has her fancy, microphone hooked up. And when we said, if you missed us a couple of weeks ago, she was very happy about the new microphone. And it's a great microphone. She has the Rode Pod mic, and it is a good microphone, I will admit. And she's got the Rode arm and everything. So, yeah, she is on the ball, and she sounds fantastic. So, yeah, we're good to go. What we are going to talk about tonight really centers on free speech. And we're going to talk about some peripheral issues as well. And a lot of times people say, why do you talk about politics? I don't know that this is really politics in terms of right or left or Democrat or Republican. This has to do with fundamental things in our society. And I feel that they're misunderstood. And what's worse, and what I am going to talk about, is I feel that we are on the verge of, a transformation of terms now that we have gone through before. And I want to say, not this time. It's not going to happen this time. We've been down this road with the left and certain aspects of the mass media before. Okay, we've had to contend with debating about being an alpha male and being a masculine man. That was that turned into something ugly. Okay. And I'm all for people wanting to live the way they want to live. As a matter of fact, I'm as liberal as they come. I'm live and let live. I have no issues with any lifestyle whatsoever. I just want to make that clear before I say this. But here again, we've had to litigate what the term mother means. This is the type of stuff that we have gone down the road here the past few years. And I think it's hurting the marginalized communities that a lot of these movements are claiming to help. It's actually hurting them. And I've talked to a lot of them. I'm very much in touch with my local community. And some of these bizarre, radical conversations are hurting the core movements that started them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you agree with that? Am I off base there?
No, I actually believe that the marginalized communities have been weaponized by people with an agenda that was actually hidden behind a lot of that. And I think they started to see that in recent months, and it really showed itself in the election, where a lot of people who were traditionally liberal were like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be used in this way. And so, I'm glad to see a lot of that getting moved out of the way, and a healthy, look, I don't care what you do. I'm not here to judge anybody's lifestyle choices, but
No.
it was being weaponized to control other aspects of life that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely. And speaking of weaponization, we're going to talk about that term too, because of the fact that it is a legitimate term. You can take something like the Me Too movement was a perfect example of that. That's something that everybody understood, everybody got on board with. The idea that we should believe people who have an accusation of some kind against another person. It does not mean that we convict and sentence them based on an accusation. That's where it got carried to. What we are talking about is, let's say somebody is fighting addiction. They live in a low-income community, and they accuse a very powerful and well-respected business person of a sexual assault. In the past, it always got written off. Oh, nobody's going to believe you, honey. Okay. And that's that. I am 100% on board with the idea that, hey, you've got to take these accusations seriously, no matter who they are. And a lot of times they may not pan out, but that's fine. You have to take them seriously in the beginning. You just can't write them off and say, oh, please, you're nothing but a drug, quote unquote, addict, which is a term we do not use. And no one's going to believe you. So, I can't imagine that too many people, most reasonable people will say, yes, that's reasonable, but it didn't stop there. What happens is these movements gain momentum, they get powerful, and it's just like a bill in Congress. Little other things get slipped in there. So, all of a sudden now, let's say I had come up with this bill called Feed the Hungry Babies, and everybody puts some kind of little pet project in there, and I say, well, wait a minute, hold it. I'm not on board with that. And then what do I get accused of publicly? Oh, I'm against feeding hungry babies. And the same thing happens with the Me Too movement. A lot of these things that were thrown in there, if you're against them, well, you're pro-rape.
Yeah.
So, this is the type of thing that a lot of these movements go through. So I think that weaponization is a real term, and it is recognized, and therefore the term weaponization itself has become weaponized, because if you attach it to something, it gives legitimacy to whatever that is. In regard to free speech, I think a lot of people misunderstand it. It does not give you a shield to go out into the public and say whatever you wish with impunity. That is absolutely not true. Okay. What its general focus is on is the idea that a governmental agency, in this case in the United States, it's Congress, shall pass no laws that inhibit people's speech. And this is especially in regard to criticizing the government. Okay. And that is why you can go out and say pretty much anything you want to about the president, a member of Congress, a member of the Senate, or whatever have you. And some of it is very distasteful. And I don't agree with that. I wouldn't do it. Even politicians that I can't stand, I don't like them seeing depicted in demeaning sexual positions and all this other kind of stuff. That is not what I believe that provision is for. Mm-hmm. It's so that you can speak freely without coming home and your family's gone. Okay, because that happens in other places of the world. And we don't do that here in the United States.
Well, you know what? I'm going to disagree with you there, Billy.
Go ahead.
Because one of the things that really shook me during we'll just call them the closures, was what I was watching. I had been seeing it happen over the years leading up to it, but once that happened, I really did see a retraction of our rights and our ability to say what we wanted to say and what we believed. And that was weaponized. That whole situation was weaponized, to use that word again, for people who had an agenda with that whole situation to control people in a way that they thought was their right. And I think ultimately that behavior is actually one of the things that undid the liberals, the left leaning people who were really using that situation in that way. And I think it was eventually their undoing, because people could, after a couple of years of this, and the way that they sort of hijacked a lot of people's rights, it came
Well,
back to bite. It came back to bite them.
I don't think you're disagreeing with me. What I was getting at is there has been an assault on free speech, and it started largely with the pandemic. Okay. And this gave the idea that, oh, you can't let people speak because it might endanger the group. Okay. And then it went on, to, you can't let dissenters come forward because it's misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And as time has gone on, okay, there were a lot of things about the pandemic situation, and any number of issues. The Russia hoax, these were things that were silenced by major media and to some degree some of the tech companies. And in fact, we know now that there was a lot of things right about the dissenting opinions, and that's exactly why free speech is so important.
Yeah.
That's the first rule. Is if I enter into let's say Cynthia and I are running for, we're both governmental officials of some kind, and in this local area there's something like a dam that's going to be built, and I'm the conservative old dumb doofus, right? And I say, yes, this is going to be great for the economy. It's going to put people to work, and it's going to give us da 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 da. And Cynthia says, no, this is going to harm the environment far more than what we're going to get back out of it. And let's say there's 10 studies. Okay, I pick the 7 that supports my opinion. You pick a different 7 out of that 10 that support your opinion. Now, when we hear critics of free speech, they always talk about hate speech and they pick obvious examples. But see, here's the problem. 99.9% of the things that are discussed out there, what's true is very much in a gray area. Okay, so which one of us is right? It may not even be known until years later. But do you want big tech coming into that conversation and deciding you don't need to hear either Cynthia's or mine opinion about it? You only need to hear the one that they think is the ultimate truth because it's probably to their advantage somewhere down the line. Now, that may just be one little isolated local case, but now multiply that out over 1,000 times all over the country, and all of a sudden you can see people stepping in and deciding what the ultimate truth is, what the truth is very harmful. My number one argument for free speech is the idea that it's very hard to determine what the truth is. Okay. And my second argument is that I think the discussion, the free flow of ideas is very important in determining this. And when you shut down one side or the other, even if it's the side that I don't like that, because the idea of free discussion, the idea that certain ideas may get passed over if they're silenced, and that may turn out to be correct, I think is very, very important. And as far as hate speech goes, look, actually the free speech provisions really do cover a lot of that, with the exception of inciting violence or planning an overthrow of the government or something like that. But the idea is that who decides what hate speech is, first of all. Here again, who's the arbitrator of that? A lot of times in today's society, hate speech is anything you disagree with. But more importantly, I like the nutcases to be out in the open. Okay, yes. I like the goofballs, holding their little rallies, and 3 or 4 of them there in the local park. There's the idiots right there. When you suppress a group like that, it really is a petri dish for radicalism. It really, really is. Go ahead.
Well, I have to share. This is such a good example. So I agree with what you said. One of the things that was so disturbing about the pandemic closures was the fact that if you did voice your own opinion, you were labeled and your job was threatened by a lot of famous people, which has actually led to a lot of distaste for celebrity culture. But what I think is actually interesting, because I know for a fact that social media has been suppressing things they didn't want anyone to write about. And as we all know now, a lot of the media has been getting paid to agree with the left and suppress conservative voices. what's so interesting about this is when you suppress voices on the scale in which they were doing, you get stunned when you lose a massive election because you don't know what the actual real thoughts are out there. You don't really know the temperature of people if you're
Exactly, sure.
too disconnected. And I think it's one of the reasons why they were so dumbfounded by how poorly a lot of their decisions went over. So it's really interesting. I'm glad to see free speech getting this kind of attention because I was really deeply concerned 2 years ago. And even 2 years ago, a lot of the content that I was doing talking about freedom of speech, weaponization of the judicial system against Trump, all of that was getting suppressed.
Yeah. Let's talk about this. There's going to be a little bit of an arc here. I want to talk just very briefly about what's going on in Germany. In Germany right now, there's some weird stuff going on in terms of being able to speak. And this led to J.D. Vance, and he vented to European leaders last week, I believe it was, telling them that the biggest threat to their security was from within. And he was talking a lot about free speech. And here's where the gaslighting started. Here's where, it started long before that, but this is the latest thing that I really want to be a part of. Let's quench this right in. We're not going to go down this road of debating whether or not free speech is a good thing and how it's been mischaracterized and how it really, is a bad thing. That's bullshit. Okay. J.D. Vance, a lot of the people in the media was calling him a defender of hard right parties. And of course, being in Germany, that can mean our old friend, the Nazis. And I say our old friend because Nazis get compared to anybody you don't like anymore. It can be anybody. Okay, it can be the football team you don't like. It's almost that absurd. All right. So everybody's bringing out their favorite analogy all the time about Nazis. And when you're anywhere near Germany and you're accused of defending hard right policies, the inference is pretty clear that you're pro whatever it was that Hitler did to rise. Okay. There's a couple of things fundamentally wrong with that. We can get into a big argument about what hard right means. In a lot of people's minds, it means conservative. The Nazis were socialists. As a matter of fact, it's right in the name. If you look at the translation for Nazis and then put it into English, what it stands for is National Socialist German Workers. That's what it means in English. So it's flawed right there. It's flawed right there. And typically when we think of fascists and everything, we think of Nazis and everything, but it's different in that time and place from what we normally think of in those terms now. But all that aside, let's be very clear. There was not free speech in Nazi Germany. There was no free speech that had to be weaponized. But let's start with what's happening in Germany now. And this is what J.D. Vance was talking about when he made those remarks. And he's been accused of defending hard right parties. Here we go.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face, you insult me, I insult you, okay, finish.
It's 6:01 on a Tuesday morning, and we were with state police as they raided this apartment in northwest Germany.
Hier ist die Polizei, wir mussten bitte mal mit Ihnen reden.
Inside, 6 armed officers searched a suspect's home, then seized his laptop and cell phone. Prosecutors say those electronics may have been used to commit.
Yeah, and make no mistake, if the left had their way with what was going on during the closures, we'll put it that way, and everything else, that would have been it. All this talk about politically correct, they would have loved to enforce this kind of bullshit on the United States. And not the far right, not conservatives, the left would have loved it. And,
Like,
and
they've even talked openly about the fact. I mean, several politicians recently in Washington have actually said things like, one of them, I forget her name. She's the one with the shaved head. She said something about, we need to be able to censor Americans. It's like, what are you smoking?
yes, this is here again. This thing about free speech being such a bad thing. Oh, it's so terrible. And here again, our good friend, a term I often use, a good friend, Margaret Brennan, actually came out and said incorrectly that Nazis weaponized free speech. Let me tell you something. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. Well, I'll take that back. It's free. It was free speech as long as whatever you were saying was pro-Nazi and anti-Jew. Sure it was. But let me tell you something. If you would have taken a knee at a sporting event for the Nazi flag, you'd have been gone. I don't mean canceled. I mean gone off the face of the earth. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. That is complete and total bullshit. Margaret Brennan here, it's one thing to disagree with somebody, but here again, I think this is part of a strategy to put the term free speech and the concept of free speech under a different light. I don't think she's misspeaking here. I've noticed this more and more and more, that free speech is somehow a threat to the public. I'm hearing this bullshit more and more and more. And here she is in all her glory. And listen to how Marco Rubio handled it.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship
I have to disagree with
was
you.
specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate
That's absolutely correct.
How the hell do these people get their jobs? Because she is not the only one that I have heard say something asinine. Excuse me, I know we're on some platforms where we might get spanked, but I keep seeing this. I mean, it is so consistent. I would easily say that 70% of the talking heads on news media are idiots.
I think it's more sinister than being an idiot. An idiot is somewhat forgivable. Even Jesus said that, right?
Yeah,
Forgive them for they know not what they do.
It's their agenda. They have an agenda.
Yes. It's the idea that free speech is going to get put in a different light. And here again, we've relitigated basic things like masculinity and womanhood. And all these things have turned into big effing discussions. And I'm telling you, I am not going to tolerate it when it comes to free speech.
Do you know?
There's no reshaping this.
No. But you know why this has been a conversation in recent years? It's because the people who are used to having the mic have had to move aside as social media has taken over and the average person can now communicate their own thoughts and ideas. And it was only that becoming really, truly unleashed when people began to really share what they really thought and their numbers going down that the media really got behind the whole free speech BS, because the biggest threat to them is social media.
Yeah. And I'll even say this, what Marco Rubio said there, no, I don't agree with you. Let me tell you something. I'm saying this to Margaret Brennan and CBS. I don't give a shit who agrees with what. There's no agreeing with it. It is complete and total bullshit. What she said there. It is complete and total bullshit. There was no speaking against the Nazi Party. There was no speaking other than the party line in Nazi Germany. The idea that there was any free speech to be weaponized is absolutely, totally ludicrous.
It's kind of scary. As soon as that came out of her mouth, I was like, wow. It's beyond just her own opinion. She's spreading a falsehood about history, which is to me is terrifying. It's one thing to have your opinion, but she's also a talk show host who's supposed to actually be informed. And the fact that she said that with such conviction, And thank goodness for him, because he always has a great comeback.
Yeah. The Marco Rubio is very good, and so is J.D. Vance. Now, whether you like them as politicians or not is another thing, but they are both very skilled talkers.
Absolutely, yeah.
This not a matter of agreeing with Margaret Brennan or disagreeing with her. She's full of shit. She is absolutely 100% wrong. Okay? Yeah. There is nothing about the rise of power and the way they seized power that had anything to do with letting the average person speak their mind. That is absolutely total fucking bullshit. As a matter of fact, there's a good chance, we don't know what happened to a couple of my great uncles on my mother's side, my great uncles. We know for sure that one died in a concentration camp. We're not sure about the other. They were not Jewish, but they resisted. And they spoke against the Nazis coming into Poland. That's why they ended up in the concentration camp. That's why they ended up dead. Okay, there was no fucking free speech in Nazi Germany. Margaret Brennan can go to hell. Okay?
Billy and I have officially gone off the reservation. And we've now dinging every bell for every cuss word you can say. So yes. I have to say, I was born in Germany. I've been back many, many times. Most of my long-term clients were German and Austrian. And they have a big issue in that they make a lot of bizarre decisions in this effort to make sure that no one in the public or another country can point to them and say certain things. But the most racist, homophobic, sexist, prejudiced experience I ever had in business was actually there with a huge company that I worked for there that did not want me dressing people of color. And so they have a problem, and that they're in denial about the fact that they have a problem. And so simultaneously they're making all these bizarre decisions that end up punishing their country because they're still doing mea culpas for something that most people are not even who are alive had nothing to do with. It's a strange mix.
How ironic is it that Germany is heading in a direction that is worse than when the USSR had control of it? How is that possible, that they are heading down the road of being the Cold War Germany? That is what they are. Boy, I don't know. So anyway,
does what's her name still have control? Because she was really, I disliked her intensely. I forget the woman who ran Germany for a long time, the short one with the short hair. She really instilled a lot of this bizarre, like over the top pursuit of like mea culpaing stuff that happened in the past, to the point where now they're punishing the actual German citizens. Like it's so bizarre. Anyway,
kind of on the subject of media and so forth. I did watch Saturday Night Live, the 50-year anniversary, and I was disappointed in the program all the way across the board, because I'll tell you why. I'm a Gen X, and they had an opportunity to have a huge audience of Gen Xers because that show rose to prominence in the 1970s. It was a huge hit right at the very beginning, which was in 1975, and through the late 70s. It was a staple show, okay? And if you were at my age, sneaking up late at night on Saturday and watching some of that alternative programming, which was alternative programming at the time, you got to keep in mind this was before the prominence of cable and all this other kind of thing. So seeing some of those skits and that kind of humor was out of the ordinary. So I really thought that the program would be more retrospective. I really thought they would show more of the classic scenes. I thought they would have a lot of discussion about the humor of the time, and how that humor has changed. And the social mores and things like that. Is that humor that you could get away with today? That would have been a fascinating program. But they showed these split-second flashes of the old skits. I don't even know why they bother with that, because if you're not going to show enough of the skit that you understand what you're watching, it's pointless. It's a waste of time. Anybody that isn't familiar with the old show, those flashes would have meant nothing. And they went down the road of the same humor that has been driving network TV into the ground. They went into that road. Now, there was a couple of things that I liked. I actually like the weekend update. That's something that has maintained a certain balance. And actually, quite frankly, they've gotten away with some things that I'm surprised that they did over the last year or two, which is I'm glad. I'm glad there's offensive stuff on TV. Okay. Yeah. So, but as a whole, a lot of the humor, a lot of the entertainment that they went through for 3 hours Sunday night was no different than what has been driving mass media into the ground. And probably the pinnacle of this was, and I don't want to show it because it's actually part of an entertainment thing, and you have to stay under certain rules, certain length of time. I don't even want to bother with it. But Tom Hanks, and you've probably seen the clip by now, was dressed up like a hick with his red cap and T-shirt and flannel shirt over that, and kind of dirty and kind of hey man. That whole routine, and he was with his MAGA cap on, depicting a typical Trump supporter as they wanted to portray him. And there's a lot of people that said that he took a swipe at religion too, which is, I'm not necessarily a religious person, but here again, I don't like people of faith being put, and you have to be this stupid to be a person of faith. I think that's legitimate because he made this comment. Oh, I can tell you if there was more God in our life, we wouldn't be having all these problems. And the black host came over and said, I agree with you, sir. Let's shake hands on this. And the Tom Hanks character, oh, I ain't going to do that, meaning that he's not going to touch a black person's hand. Now, for those that may not know, I did a stint as a stand-up comedian years ago. This was probably about 20 years ago. This was like 2004, 2005. For a couple of years there, I was on this kick. I was doing stand-up. And I met a lot of headliners. From the West Coast. And they all agreed, you can get away with being offensive, but there's one rule. The number one rule is it's got to be funny. Mm-hmm. There was nothing funny about this. I don't know what kind of a studio audience they had, because sometimes the laughter is faked. But I didn't get much of a reaction from the studio audience. And the only reaction that I noticed on the left, and you can comment on this online, was, yeah, that puts them in their place. There was nobody that said, oh, that's hysterical. There was nobody, as far as I know, even if you thought that was a great skit, said, oh, I laughed hilariously at that. I thought that was funnier than hell. Nobody.
Yeah.
Cynthia, your comment on this. Like I said, the supporters of it were happy about the dig against Trump supporters, but they didn't think it was funny.
Well, the only people who are still watching SNL on a regular basis are liberals because they're such a liberal show. I always liked SNL in the 70s and the 80s. So, I was a huge fan of Eddie Murphy and Church Lady and Chopping Broccoli and I Want to Be a Hoe. I mean, some of the best skits ever that everyone knew how to imitate. And I think one of the reasons why they've avoided those glory days is because by comparison, that's why they probably didn't show the clips. They're so not funny and not interesting today compared to what they were in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, there's a couple people who've done some really great work on SNL, but the vast majority of the skits are just not funny. They're so busy trying to be insulting to people, particularly people who are conservative, that they've lost their ability to actually be funny. And they won't even make fun of themselves the vast majority of the time. I'm disappointed in Tom Hanks. I always liked him as an actor. I thought he was really talented. He could play just about any part, but I think he's more concerned about some of the whispers that have been going around in the last couple of years about some of his choices over the years of who to hang out with and stuff like that. And I think maybe he feels under attack. This is my opinion. I think he feels under attack, and he only did that role and did that just so that he could, say, oh, they don't like me because I make fun of the Trump supporters. Because I don't see any other reason to do something that was that dumb. And that it was actually, it was prejudice. The way that to imply that people who are conservative that support Trump are all racist is terrible, because the truth is that's just not true. And I know tons of Trump supporters, and they come from all walks of life, and they're all colors of every, the whole rainbow. And apparently nobody over there at SNL is looking at the statistics, because that's over 50% of the country.
Yeah, and he's also playing up on the stereotype that Trump supporters are stupid. And I'd like
yeah,
to see I'd like to see Tom Hanks debate Vivek Ramaswamy or JD Vance. Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Let's just say something too. They always want to use a Southern accent to
Mm.
imply that someone is stupid, and the vast majority of American presidents are actually Southern.
Yeah.
So it's like, why do you have to whip out a Southern accent? That's also, its own form of prejudice.
He probably has a little bit of a score to settle. I will admit that some of the staunch MAGA people have painted him out to be something really ugly. And without getting into the details of that, pictures with certain people and all that. You and I talked about that prior to the show. Pictures of being with Jeffrey Epstein, they show up all over. Trump is with him, Clinton's with him. Anybody you want to pick was with him. And you got to keep in mind, somebody who had that kind of wealth and that kind of power can buy himself into circles largely through these high-profile fundraisers and parties and things where the entrance fee, the door charge is $10,000 or $20,000 for a plate. So, and that the whole idea is that you get to rub shoulders and stuff like that. I knew a businessman here in town that, had a picture of himself with Ronald Reagan that there's no doubt he bought access to. Saying constantly picturing somebody with that and as far as Jeffrey Epstein's playing goes too, and I'm not going to speak specifically about Tom Hanks because I don't know, but generally speaking, and I want to say generally, I don't know the history of the Jeffrey Epstein plane. But typically, jets in particular are very expensive to fly and maintain, even for somebody who's got a lot of money. So what happens is you can't afford to leave those things sitting around until you need them. So they're often used as, what are essentially jet limousine services. And the jet setters of the world, the professional athletes and all these other types of things, hop on these things and go places where they don't want to have to wait in line and go through a long security line and be exposed to the public. It's just easier, to pay one of these courier jets, X amount of thousands of dollars, which a lot of times is pocket change. And as a matter of fact, I've had some corporate people explain to me, if you have 6 or 7 CEOs that need to go somewhere, sometimes it's more cost effective to get one of these private jets than it is to have them take 2 or 3 days out of their schedule and pay for commercial transportation. It's sometimes more cost effective. So the idea that somebody has been on that plane or somewhere around in that circle makes them guilty of something, that's a little far reaching. I just because somebody turned up on travel logs, it's a little different when the insinuation is that they went to the island and they spent a week there. That's a little different. Okay, but here again, I don't know about any of these different cases. They always say there's more coming out and never does. I don't think there's, when it comes to P. Diddy and all that, I don't think there's going to be a lot of shit coming out about him either. Everybody says, everybody's nervous. There's always going to be all these. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's already turned state's evidence.
Yeah, I think
that's what's happened.
He's had too much time. They've had too much time for things to get destroyed. This is similar to what happened with Epstein. I think Epstein was a spy, and I think a lot of that stuff he was doing was setting people up for potential blackmail and just getting the dibs on what they were really about. I mean, I don't have proof of this, but there's been a lot of inference to that, and it certainly explains how he ended up dead in that jail with all those weird coincidences that all happened within the same hour.
Oh yeah, the camera's going bad and somebody looking, taking a break, all at the right time. That was a perfect storm, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Boy. All right. Well, anyway, free speech is a good thing. Free speech is a good thing. Free speech is a good thing. Okay. We are not going to get gaslighted into some bullshit conversation about how, there's certain aspects of free speech that we've never considered. Oh, no, there isn't. Fuck off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We always kind of wrap up the program here with, kind of what we're both doing. Cynthia is up to a lot more than I am, actually. But what are you up to, Cynthia? What are you involved in these days?
I am giving a speech on August 6th. I'm like in the wrong year. March 6th. Yes, March 6th in Austin. I'm giving a speech at the Wellbeing at Work Summit, and then I'll be in Chicago May 1st. check my shamanisis.com to find out about all the events and speeches that I'm giving and book signings and stuff like that. I also have my Glow Up with Shamanisis podcast. I just did an amazing interview with fashion designer Carlton Jones, who shares his journey after finding out some really traumatic news in the 80s about his health, and how he has built this extraordinary career of dressing some of the most famous women in the world and designing clothes for some of the most famous music stars. So go check it out all over the podcast channels. Glow Up with Shamanisis.
Fantastic. My name is Billy Dees, and you can find me on the old Twitter, which is now referred to as X, and X is a good thing for free speech for sure. And my screen name on X is @BillyDees, and pretty much you can find the Billy Dees podcast on any podcast platform. We have a 10-year history now. This show in its current form is 10 years. My history with this type of thing goes way longer than that, but the history of the show in its current incarnation is 10 years old. And as far as social media goes, we do have, besides X, we do have the Billy Dees podcast page on Facebook now. And I've been trying to put some stuff up there that's related to media and other things just besides the podcast. So, and some behind the scenes stuff, and it's all free. Okay, there's no hidden little thing. Well, to be a special top #1 fan, you have to pay. No, you're good. You can come to the podcast page on Facebook or on X, and we're good to go. So anyway, check us out there. Look in the playlist of the Billy Dees podcast for our most recent discussion interview that we had. A woman by the name of Stephanie, who was badly injured by a drunk driver who got a slap on the wrist. And that's one of the many pet peeves that I have about our judicial system. And she's an advocate for crash victims. She's and survivors, and she's an advocate for MAD. And there's a discussion there. We had an audience, and people could come up and speak. Rachel Thompson was part of that discussion as well. She's on that podcast. So do check that out in the playlist. It's Stephanie's story, how a drunk driver changed her life forever. I'm Billy Dees. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sitting in on Thursday night, as always.
You're welcome, Billy. I always have a good time.
All right. And until next time, which will probably be next week. We got the frequency of the episodes here are generally at least once a week, but sometimes 2 a week. So to make sure you don't miss an episode of the Billy Dees podcast, subscribe on your favorite podcast network. Follow me on X or on Facebook. All the following and all the listening is free, and you won't miss out on a lot of the stuff we're doing. So thank you very much for hanging out with us. And until next time, take it easy.
Bye.
Do you listen to music or audiobooks on streaming devices such as Sonos or Amazon speakers? How about on your car sound system? If you use Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music on any of these systems, you can also listen to the Billy Dees podcast the same way. Billy and his team go the extra mile to make sure our podcasts sound as good or better than anything on the radio. Listening to the Billy Dees podcast has never been easier. You literally just have to ask.